before we go to comments from our colleagues here, what are any of the military implications of this? The Council on Foreign Relations is concerned with foreign relations and military relations. Are any of you worried about the peril of this falling into the wrong hands and leading to weapons?
Julie, you want to start?
Well, you know, falling into the wrong hands, I think, is probably not an applicable concept here, since, you know, a sixth grader can probably use these technologies. So we should assume that everybody has the capability. The question is...
But that's a significant statement in and of itself.
Exactly, which is, I'm sure, why this is on the list of WMD that our National Security Advisor just created. But, you know, it's like the concern about any biological threat. Just because you can do it doesn't mean it's a weapon of choice, doesn't mean it would be the most terrifying weapon of choice. Mother Nature is a very good terrorist herself, but I certainly think it deserves consideration in that paradigm.
Mm-hmm. I'm less concerned. Oh, sorry, Drew, you want to
go? No, please go ahead.
Okay. I'm less concerned about deliberate use, deliberate modification, than compared to accidental and biosafety concerns. You know, Julie used to run the CDC, and in the era after she left, we've seen, what, 8 major incidents of biosafety breaches, and that's at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, our most secure civilian facility for biological research. Accidents happen. And when you get to the point where it's kids in high school labs or, you know, mentally confused college kids playing around and imagining they're the next Breaking Bad mad scientist or what have you, then I start getting very worried and very concerned about whether or not we've really thought through how to create a safety paradigm. And you know, when Drew described this whole new algorithm of how people are approaching biology, kind of following a trajectory of the placement of creativity versus distributed production and so on, that has made the tech and computer revolution. You know, look at what has resulted on the computer side. We've gone from outsourcing more and more and more of computer production and chip production and smartphones and everything to China and to Russia to a lesser degree. And now we have this massive cybersecurity crisis where nobody in the world feels like their data is secure, that their very personality, their very thoughts are accessible, whether it's to their own government or to some hacker somewhere out there or to a foreign government. And so we're squarely in the realm of all aspects of national security. And I think, you know, this biology revolution is taking the genome to the place where the cyber has been. It'll have different dimensions, but it's similarly so diffuse and distributed, crosses so many national boundaries, and involves so many different legal systems that essentially it's beyond regulation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Drew, you wanted to make a point on the potential military applications or foreign policy implications?
Sure. It's a retro comment. The last time I was at the council, I think, was joined with Matt Messelson. And one of the important things to remember, it's slightly before my time, is you know, we in the U.S. used to have an offensive biological weapons program, and made a very good decision heading into the Nixon administration to stand that down. And so it's just worth remembering that and bringing that wisdom forward. We should not, in my opinion, take actions that even inadvertently might lead others to remilitarize biology. So although we don't say it out loud very much, it is absolutely critical that nation states do not remilitarize biology on top of the new capacities that are developed. And it's a retro comment because we worked it through many decades ago, but let's not lose that one.
Yeah, a norm was set, and I think that one of the things we were talking about earlier, there are few norms here in this business.
Well, there was a norm set, but to Drew's point, it was massively violated. I mean, there was a treaty signed, it was in the Nixon administration, Everybody was getting rid of their bioweapons, and that's when the Soviets, in fact, revved their entire program up so that they had this massive biological weapons program that included use of primitive genetic engineering,
which was secret,
to enhance.
Which was secret and very often doubted whether they really had it at the time.
Yes.
We want to open it up to all of you for comments and questions. I think there are some mics roaming around. The question in the center here, he's got his card up right in the center.
Thank you.
Could you identify yourself?
Yes, I shall. Richard Huber. I'm chairman of a company called Invina Wine, but I'm here really as a investor and a director of Aqua Bounty, a company that has got some notoriety for having the first genetically modified animal product that has been approved. Mm-hmm. And my question is related to that, and you all touched upon it. The U.S. regulatory process, having seen it close hand, 13 years to get approval from the FDA, is a shambles. And supposedly science-based regulatory is a myth. Politics is all over the place. Can you suggest some better way of having a regulatory framework that both provides protection, something you commented upon many times, but also allows the process to move at somewhat faster pace than 13 years? Thank you.
That's a tough question, Mr. Huber. I think I wish Peggy Hamburg would hear. I'm sure she didn't block your product, I'm sure. So
I don't know what Peggy would say, so I certainly don't intend to speak for her, but I'm part of the Bio Innovation Trade Association Executive Committee, and of course we're very keen to look at how the FDA can have what it needs to be able to improve its performance, and speed is one of those performance metrics. So I believe the agency wants to improve. The 21st Century Cures legislation that's passed the House but not the Senate is an important step in that direction. But there's also the missing underpinning of regulatory science. And when we think about scientific investments in the United States, I think we zoom to the NIH or maybe the National Academies of Science, but we don't necessarily think about the surround sound that has to go on to make those scientific advances available to people, and regulatory science is a big piece of that. So what we're really talking about today is a prime example of where we're going to need a whole new framework for regulatory science to be able to do what we all want to do, which is accelerate the value of the innovations that we're creating.
I also think the staffing at FDA has been a problem for Peggy Hamburg and her predecessors. There are not very many first-rate molecular biologists and geneticists who'd rather work for the FDA than Stanford or even
Why would they?
Or CDC.
I mean, look, let's be real. It's just like trying to get top-of-the-line cyber folks working for the FBI.
Yeah.
You know, why would you want to take a salary of $90,000 a year or $110,000 a year with all the government bureaucracy you have to live with, when you could make 10 times that with a smart play crossing between academia
Lori,
and the private
some of us
sector.
do it because we care.
Right.
And we think it's the right thing to do, and we want to serve our country.
But that's a distinct minority.
I do think that I want to be very respectful of the quality of the scientists that are at the FDA, because there are some very outstanding people there. And again, part of the 21st Century Cure legislation is to give the FDA the hiring flexibilities and the salary support that they need to try to be more attractive to people. So I really want to get behind them and say, how can we help you? Because I completely agree with your point. We all agree with the problem, but we need to help them solve it.
Here on the right. Yes, sir. Your name and affiliation, please.
John Train. I'm a columnist and do other things. Do we know anything at all about what's happening in Biopreparat, the Russian militarization of bio?
That's been long since destroyed, Biopreparat. What we don't know, so under the Soviets, there were two giant arms of biological weapons production. One was Biopreparat, which was allegedly civilian. It answered directly to the Politburo. And the other was what was going on inside the military. Biopreparat became transparent. There were many years of a program with our National Academy of Sciences to transform the entire infrastructure to public health good, and to find employment for those scientists outside of weapons production. What we don't know almost anything about is what really was going on inside the military labs and what may or may not persist in Russian military labs. That we don't know.
So you can't write a column about a secret. We don't know the answer. Another question or comment? Yes, sir, over here on the left. Your name and affiliation, please.
Stanley Arkin, I'm a member of the council. But, my son, a professor who works at Cal in bioengineering, synthetic biology, Adam Arkin. And you may know him.
A very dear friend and colleague, yes.
And from time to time when he speaks to me about the issue, what's occurred to me is, at what point does security attach? And he's given me hypotheticals which can curl your hair. At what point is it an outside governmental agency? Is a university have some kind of special authority or obligation? But at what point in a course of research does security intervene and therefore seek to protect us all?
Drew, I think that was directed at you, but other panelists may want to make a quick comment too.
Sure. So a pleasure to meet you through the video link, sir. Adam is a dear friend and an amazing person. I think it depends on the aspect of security specifically that arises. So, you know, there's not a blanket statement that is responsive to anything, everything that could be practiced. One of the hallmarks of how modern biotechnology flourishes is that there is a distribution of responsibility to the nodes, to the community, to the protagonists, to the individual actors. And so in the just conceiving of an idea, a good citizen is mindful of safety and security aspects. And to attempt to implement, you know, only a top-down control framework doesn't scale. There are exceptions to this, which have been developed, in my opinion, on a responsive and ad hoc basis. You know, so for example, spent more time over the last 20 months than I might have wished as a member of the National Biosecurity Board, trying to be responsive to a government request around how, if and how work involving gain of function with flu and MERS and SARS might proceed or not. And about a month ago, we shipped our recommendations into the government for how to think about.
You better explain a little more of what that means, what the problem was.
Yeah.
But take a minute or two to.
Sure, but I mean, but it's a good example to illustrate how much we're on our heels in many respects in terms of responding to security concerns. So a number of years ago, as many might know, there was public funding for work to explore how particular strains of flu might be adapted to potentially create a new type of flu variant that might lead to a pandemic. So could you take bird flu and have it be adapted so it would passage through mammals, create casualties in mammals? Very controversial work. When it was brought forward by the research community, it first emerged in the context of scientific papers that were being considered for publication. And at that point, very late in the practice of the work, concerns were raised that resulted in debates about whether or not such research should be published ever, never mind whether or not the work should have been done. This experience, combined with imperfect inventory control, imperfect management of shipping of samples from US government labs, combined with other factors, led to the federal government putting a pause on all funding for doing gain-of-function research on specific human pathogens, viral pathogens like flu. And it took us the better part of 20 months to work through the aspects of that and come up with a set of recommendations that the federal government could consider implementing in terms of if and how to allow such work to proceed. The point I'm trying to communicate, if I zoom out for a second, is this is a lot of work for a specific case. We're operating on our heels a little bit. It's very ad hoc and idiosyncratic. It doesn't really scale as an approach. And if you look at where this landscape is going and how